Okay, so let's unpack this. You know how some places just, they feel kind of charged?
Yeah.
Like the past isn't just over, but maybe still lingering. In the air, the foundations, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Not just, history in a book, but like a physical feeling,
Yeah.
a cold spot maybe,
Yeah.
or that prickle on your arm, or hearing something you just can't explain.
Right. It's that idea that really intense events, they don't just happen at a place. It's like they somehow embed themselves in it,
Uh-huh.
leaving behind some kind of residue, maybe an echo or,
Mhm.
well, maybe something more active.
And if any place in America really seems to capture that idea, it's got to be the house at 508 East 2nd Street in Villisca, Iowa.
Oh, yeah.
The infamous Villisca Axe Murder House. It's widely considered one of the most haunted places in the entire country.
It really is. And for this deep dive, we've gone through that stack of sources you provided.
Mm.
I mean, everything from seasoned paranormal investigators, detailed logs, to psychological analyses, and even just the quiet insights from people who live right there in Villisca.
Yeah.
Our mission really is to sift through all of that. Try to understand the phenomena people are reporting there, look at the theories they use to explain it all, and see what these different viewpoints tell us about the house itself.
So we're going to look at the house, physically, but also the patterns and what people say they experience. Some really unsettling firsthand accounts are in there,
Definitely.
plus the psychological angles, which are fascinating. Hearing from the locals and exploring the different ideas about, well, what exactly might be lingering inside those walls, if anything. Basically, we're asking, what do these sources you've shared suggest is actually happening at Villisca?
Exactly. It's a real deep dive into all the layers of reported reality at this one. Very specific, very notorious location.
Okay. So let's start with the house itself. The sources describe it physically. It's white, pretty small, looks pretty unassuming from the street, right? Just sitting there on East 2nd Street in this quiet Iowa town.
Right. You look at pictures, and you'd probably never guess its history.
No.
But the sources, they make it really clear the second people start describing their experience inside, or even just walking up to it. That word unassuming just evaporates.
Yeah.
It's often described as feeling not ordinary, and its history is, well, it's inescapable. The site of those horrific 1912 axe murders. 8 lives lost in one night. That single event is the anchor for pretty much everything that gets reported there today.
And something crucial that comes up in a lot of accounts is that the inside, the layout, it's mostly unchanged since that night.
That's a huge point.
Yeah.
The attic, which, some people think was a potential hiding place for the killer, it's still there, just as it was.
Wow.
And the room where the 2 visiting Stillinger girls were murdered. That's specifically noted in the sources as being kept pretty much untouched. Almost like a macabre memorial.
That preservation aspect feels significant, like it holds the space and time almost.
Yeah. It seems incredibly potent in the reports, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just knowing the history, it's being in the physical space where it happened, a space that hasn't been drastically altered. And the very first things visitors often report are these immediate physical sensations right when they enter, or sometimes just being near it.
Like what are those first things people tend to feel?
Well, cold spots are really common.
Mm-hmm.
Spots that feel freezing cold for no reason, no drafts, windows aren't open, nothing obvious.
Okay.
People also report feeling this distinct pressure on their chest, almost like something heavy is just pressing down.
Mm-hmm.
And this one comes up a lot. A really unsettling feeling of nausea, like sudden seasickness almost.
Yeah, I noticed the sources really highlighted that nausea bit and how often it apparently vanishes like instantly the moment someone steps back outside the house. That's a striking detail.
It really is. It ties the feeling so specifically to being inside the house, not just feeling generally off. It suggests the environment itself might be triggering a physical reaction. And these immediate feelings, they often happen right before or alongside the more direct phenomena that seem to form patterns over time.
Okay, so beyond feeling chilled or sick,
Yeah.
what are the recurring events? The things people report actually encountering again and again?
The source is pretty consistent on this. Scratches appearing on skin, people find them later, have no idea how they got there. That's reported frequently.
Right.
Unexplained bruises, too, showing up maybe hours later, often in places you wouldn't normally bump.
Okay.
And then the auditory stuff. Whispers, when everyone's counted for and silent, or the very distinct sound of footsteps, disembodied footsteps, often heard coming from the upstairs area.
These are exactly the kinds of things that, get grouped under the big umbrella of haunting. And the sources dig into specific theories about what that could actually mean in a place like this.
Exactly. One common idea presented is this concept of residual hauntings.
Residual, like leftover energy.
Kind of. The theory suggests that incredibly intense events, like the sheer terror and violence of that night in 1912, can somehow imprint themselves onto the location, like an old tape recording just playing back echoes of the past.
Oh, okay.
So the fear, the sounds, maybe even the feelings from that night,
Hmm.
they might just be repeating,
Yeah.
stuck on a loop in the building itself.
So the footsteps you hear, maybe a cry someone reports, that feeling of panic. Under this theory, it could just be a replay, not necessarily an aware, intelligent entity interacting with you.
That's one perspective offered in the sources, yeah.
Mhm.
It's the house holding on to the memory, the intense emotional energy of the event.
Right.
But then the reports pretty quickly move into phenomena that seem way more interactive,
Right.
which brings up the whole idea of intelligent hauntings.
Okay, so now we're talking about something that isn't just a recording playing back, but something that seems aware, maybe even responsive to people being there.
Precisely. That's the idea. The sources mention things like objects being moved. Investigators leave something in one spot, come back, and it's somewhere else entirely. Flashlights are a big one. Investigators using them report them turning on and off seemingly on command or when asked to.
Really?
Yeah. And a really significant piece of evidence, often cited for this, highlighted in the sources, is electronic voice phenomena, EVPs.
Ah, right. Capturing voices on audio recordings that nobody heard out loud at the time.
Exactly. And the sources include this really chilling specific example of an EVP captured right there in the Villisca house. It was apparently just static on the recording, and then coming through the static, a very clear whisper, and said, "He's still here."
Wow. Okay, he's still here. That completely changes the potential meaning, doesn't it? If that's what was captured, it shifts from just echoes of the victims to, well, something potentially present and aware.
It really does.
Yeah.
And that leads perfectly into some of the firsthand accounts that are detailed in the sources. These aren't just vague feelings people had. They're specific, documented, pretty unsettling incidents.
Like the one from the paranormal investigator, the one with like 20 years of experience, Rachel Coleman.
Yes, exactly. Her account from back in 2018 is featured prominently.
Yeah.
And yeah, she's described as a seasoned investigator, so presumably not someone easily spooked or new to weird phenomena. She stayed overnight in the house.
And the sources say she was in the children's room, the one described as untouched.
That's right. She specifically notes the time on her audio recorder, 1:55 a.m., deep in the night.
And what happened? What did she report?
She heard a whisper,
Yeah.
very clearly, and she identified it as sounding like a child's voice. The word she heard was mama.
Okay, that is already intense. Hearing a child's voice saying "mama" in that particular room at nearly 2 a.m., but didn't something physical happen right after that?
It did. Immediately after hearing the whisper, she describes her arm starting to sting, like really intensely. And when she looked down, she actually saw 3 distinct scratches forming on her skin. Right there. Her description was like something had dragged a nail across me.
That is, wow, that's visceral. And the sources mentioned she packed up and left the house pretty soon after that happened, within the hour.
She did. Got out of there. And the report says she's never gone back.
Okay.
For someone with 2 decades in the field, that kind of reaction, it speaks volumes about how intense that experience must have been for her. It clearly went way beyond just some spooky bumps in the night.
Yeah, it's powerful when someone who does this professionally is that profoundly shaken. And it seems like it's not just limited to experienced investigators. The sources also mention accounts from more regular visitors, right? Like that YouTuber couple, Haunt Trackers, who stayed there in 2022.
Yes, their documented overnight stay is another key account. And it includes another instance of these unexplained physical marks. One of the pair discovered these significant unexplained bruises on her back after they left.
Oh.
Yeah. And she was apparently adamant she hadn't fallen, she didn't bump into anything hard, and obviously hadn't been touched like that by her partner. The bruises just appeared.
And similar to Rachel Coleman's experience, this wasn't entirely out of the blue, right? Didn't she report feeling something just before that or earlier?
Yes. Earlier that night, while she was in the kitchen area, she reported a very distinct physical sensation. She said she felt a hand on her shoulder.
Whoa.
And she described it as feeling small, explicitly saying like a child's. She whipped around, naturally, and there was absolutely no one there. The bruises were discovered sometime after that specific unnerving feeling.
So now we have multiple accounts, separated by years, different people involving this feeling of being touched, sometimes specifically like a child, followed by unexplained physical marks, scratches, or bruises. That definitely adds a layer of consistency to the reports.
It really does. It suggests a pattern beyond just subjective feelings. And then beyond the physical contact stuff, there are those other unsettling auditory reports that lots of visitors mention. Hearing crying sounds, sometimes even hearing screaming.
Which I guess could potentially line up with that residual haunting idea, right? Echoes of the terror from that night.
Possibly, yeah. That's one way to interpret it. But then you have that other deeply disturbing auditory report mentioned in the sources, hearing laughter.
Right. Specifically, laughter coming from the attic.
And the way the sources describe it is childlike and warped. That combination, childlike and warped, is particularly chilling.
Yeah.
It doesn't fit neatly into just hearing sad echoes of the victims or replays of the original violence. It suggests something else entirely, especially if it's heard coming from the space where the killer might have hidden before or after the act.
These specific anecdotes are really compelling, especially when they involve, physical effects or things captured on audio. But the sources also bring in a really important, very different perspective, the psychological one. Like, what happens to us, to our minds, when we walk into a place with such a horrific known history?
Exactly. This is where the insights summarized from Dr. Elena Torres, who's described as a psychologist specializing in trauma environments, become really relevant. Her core idea, as presented, is that simply knowing a space was the site of extreme violence. It fundamentally changes how we perceive that space.
So basically, if you know the gruesome story, you go in already, kind of primed for weirdness.
That's the idea. Your senses naturally become heightened. You are, whether you realize it or not, sort of scanning for threats, for anomalies, in an environment you consciously know was incredibly dangerous. And this heightened state, this hyper-awareness, can make us interpret ambiguous stimuli, normal old house sounds, shadows, drafts, in very specific, often threatening ways. A shadow moving in the corner of your eye. In that mindset, it's not just a shadow, it feels like a figure. The house creaking, maybe it's not just wood settling, maybe it sounds like footsteps or whispers.
So what we perceive as something paranormal could, at least in some cases, be our own fear and anticipation, literally shaping how we experience the environment. We're almost psychologically haunting ourselves because of the story.
That's a significant part of Dr. Torres's perspective, as summarized in the sources. She airily describes this reaction as just human nature, how we're wired to react in a place associated with severe trauma and threat. But, and this is crucial, the sources are careful to include her important qualification. This doesn't mean what they feel isn't real. The feeling of pressure, the sense of being watched, the sudden nausea of those subjective experiences are absolutely real to the person having them, regardless of whether the ultimate cause is external or internal.
That's such a key distinction. It validates the genuineness of the experience people are having, while still offering a potential explanation rooted in our own psychology. It really just frames that central question perfectly, doesn't it? Is the activity coming from outside us, ghosts, residual energy, whatever? Or are we, in a way, projecting our own internal awareness of the horror onto the space itself?
It really lays out that fundamental puzzle. And it's a puzzle that the people who actually live near the house, the Villisca locals, have kind of lived alongside for generations. What do the sources say about their perspective? The people who see it every day?
Well, the sources describe a very cautious attitude among the residents, maybe even bordering on fearful or at least deeply respectful of its reputation. They apparently talk about the house in hushed tones, low voices, and many actively avoid going near it, especially after dark. It's this infamous part of their town's history. But it doesn't sound like something they treat casually or lightly at all.
It's clearly not just some tourist attraction or historical landmark for them. It sounds like it's a palpable, maybe uncomfortable presence in their community.
Yeah.
And there was that specific account from an anonymous resident mentioned, someone who grew up hearing all the stories.
Yes, that was striking. This resident recounted how the tales of the house, the whispers, the warnings, they were just a normal part of growing up in Villisca. And they specifically mentioned this incident where a group of local kids, you know how kids are, dared each other to actually go inside the house, just for bravado, to prove they weren't scared.
Oh boy, how did that turn out?
Well, according to this resident's account, the outcome was telling. One of the children who went in apparently ended up needing therapy afterward because of the experience. And the others who were part of that dare, who also went inside, they simply refused, flat out refused to ever talk about what they saw or experienced in there, ever again.
Wow, that level of impact, especially on local kids who presumably grew up steeped in the lore, That really underscores that whatever is going on there, or whatever people experience there, it's profound. It's not just jump scares for thrill-seeking tourists. It seems to genuinely affect people deeply, sometimes enough to require professional help or just silence them completely.
It definitely adds a layer of weight beyond just, investigator logs or YouTube videos. Now, stepping back towards the more spiritual or paranormal interpretations again, the sources also bring in perspectives from mediums who have visited the house. What did they report sensing?
Yes, the sources mention that mediums visiting the house have often reported sensing a strong feeling of confusion among spirits believed to be present. The idea comes up frequently that the victims, maybe especially the children, might be sort of lost, perhaps trapped in a repeating loop of their final terrifying moments, unable to fully move on.
That seems to connect back a bit to the residual haunting idea, that loop concept, but frames it differently through the lens of conscious spirits who are stuck, rather than just an energy playback.
Exactly. It gives it consciousness, albeit a confused one.
Yeah.
But then the sources introduce a much darker spiritual theory, one that goes beyond just the victim's lingering presence or confusion.
Okay.
It's the belief, held by some, that the killer didn't just leave behind trauma and death. They believe the killer left something of himself behind, too. His own energy, his rage, maybe his malevolence, and that this energy might still reside within the house, perhaps even stronger or more dominant than the victim's presence.
That possibility is incredibly unsettling. It shifts the whole potential dynamic from a place of lingering sadness or fear
Yeah.
to one of active, present malice.
It's a heavy idea. And this theory, among others, is often used by those who hold it to try and explain some of the other reported phenomena, things that don't easily fit the residual echo model, like light bulbs suddenly bursting when investigators are asking questions or setting up equipment,
Right.
or batteries in cameras, recorders, flashlights, draining almost instantly when brought into certain areas of the house, particularly upstairs or near the attic. These are reported quite often by different teams over the years.
And that specific feeling people consistently report about the attic itself.
Yes. The sources note a recurring report that the attic, again, that potential hiding place for the killer, feels distinctly different. People use words like it feels alive, not just old or creepy, but actively aware.
Which brings us right back to that really chilling question that seems to hang over all the reports, the question posed implicitly and sometimes explicitly in the sources. If there is some kind of intelligent or active presence in that house, is it just the victims? Or could the killer's energy, maybe even the killer himself in some non-physical form, still be there too?
And this isn't just speculation. This is a belief explicitly stated by some investigators mentioned in the source material. Based on their own experiences, the feelings they get, the things they witness or record inside the house, they've concluded that the dominant, often oppressive or even malevolent presence felt most strongly in the attic. They believe it's not one of the victims. They believe it's the killer.
Described with those two simple, chilling words the sources used: watching, waiting.
Exactly. That phrase just perfectly encapsulates the shift in theory for some people, from seeing Villisca as a place of lingering sorrow and residual trauma to viewing it as a place of potential ongoing threat, of active, watchful malevolence. It reframes the whole mystery from just what happened back then to what remains right now.
It really throws that core tension we talked about earlier into sharp relief, doesn't it? The tension between these deeply unsettling supernatural explanations and the plausible psychological ones, and how incredibly difficult, maybe impossible it is to definitively untangle them in a place with this kind of history.
And maybe that very difficulty, that ambiguity, is precisely what drove people to places like Villisca in the first place, according to the sources. These locations, they tap into something fundamental in us, our deepest human fears. Sudden, violent death, injustice that feels unresolved, the sheer terror of the unknown, what happens after we die. They force us, even if just for a night or a tour, to confront these huge questions about death, about consciousness, and about the lasting impact that extreme violence might have on a physical place.
So really, whether you find yourself leaning more towards the idea of the house holding onto residual energy or active spirits potentially, both the victims and the perpetrator, or whether you see it primarily through the lens of powerful, undeniable human psychology reacting to known trauma. The source material makes it pretty clear that something profound and deeply unsettling is associated with the Moore house.
It's clearly not just an old house where a terrible crime happened long ago. It's a place where, according to all these varied accounts, the past seems to refuse to stay buried. Whether that something is a residue of that night's horrific memory, or an active, palpable form of malice, or a complex trauma response in visitors, the house undeniably profoundly impacts those who enter its walls.
So we've taken this deep dive through the many layers of the Villisca House experience as it's presented in the sources you shared. We've looked at everything from those first physical sensations people feel just walking in,
Right, the cold, the nausea.
to consistent patterns of reported phenomena like the scratches, the footsteps, the voices. We touched on those incredibly specific and unsettling firsthand accounts from people like Rachel Coleman and the Haunt Trackers couple.
The scratches forming, the bruises appearing.
We explored the different ways people try to explain it, residual versus intelligent hauntings. We considered that crucial psychological perspective from Dr. Torres about how our own minds react to such places.
Yeah, the heightened senses, the interpretation.
We heard about the quiet but powerful knowledge and caution of the local residents, the people who live with this story daily, and we looked at the spiritual theories, from confused victim spirits to that really chilling possibility of the killer's own dark energy remaining.
It covers a lot of ground, a lot of possibilities.
It really does. We've seen how the house itself, though physically preserved and maybe silent in a literal sense, seems to, according to these accounts, speak in many other ways through those creaks and whispers, maybe through EVPs, through unexplained marks on skin, and absolutely through the undeniable, often disturbing impact it has on nearly everyone who walks through its doors. The Villisca Axe Murder House, it seems, holds its secrets very close, but maybe reveals just enough to keep the questions swirling, to keep them not only alive, but actively pressing on anyone who dares to visit.
Yeah, it certainly leaves you thinking.
And maybe that leaves us, and you listening, with a final lingering thought to really chew on, something building directly on all this material. What is the actual nature of a place that's been so irrevocably marked, so deeply stained by such intense, horrific history? Is it actually possible that extreme trauma, that level of profound fear and violence, can leave an imprint so deep on a physical location that it genuinely blurs the lines?
Blurs the lines between...
Between a historical event that's over and a present felt experience, between memory and reality, between our own psychological responses and something else entirely, something that feels, to so many who go there, fundamentally other.
It definitely makes you think differently about the spaces we inhabit, doesn't it? About the history they hold, and whether some of that history might be much closer, much more present than we usually imagine.
Something to consider, for sure.